My daughter was wishing she had a bunk bed like her friend. After giving it some thought, I gave her far more than she could ever imagine. I gave her this.
Drinking!
I always thought that planning was fun to do, and I do it at my computer using Fusion 360 to digitally build all my ideas, and this time was no exception. The bed is 120 by 200 centimeters, and it only needs support at each corner to keep it off the floor. So only these three parts are needed to keep it lofted. The rest of the bed parts are only for design and safety. Most parts of this project are made out of 90mm or 12mm MDF. I think I used about 5 full sheets to complete the project. I have never really worked with MDF before. It was not as I was expecting it, probably because I had fairly good dust extraction, but those times I did not have dust extraction, well, those times were not so fun. But overall, MDF is quite nice to work with. After most of the parts had been cut, I started to assemble all the inner drawers. I used the most simple possible design you can imagine. I assembled the sides first of all, and I put the bottom on top of the drawer just like a lid and nailed it in place. This method is really fast, but really ugly. But then again, it's for a 7-year-old child, so I don't think her friends will stand and look at the drawers and think, I could have done that better. Nah, this is good enough. A really good, fast and clean way to remove all the glue squeeze outs from the inside corners of the drawers is to use one of these card scrapers. This piece of MDF is gonna be the two sides of the steps leading up to the bed. After marking out everything, I use a jigsaw to cut out the rough shape. I don't cut exact at the line, I'll leave a little bit of room to fine cut it later. To make the fine cuts, I use a circular saw and very carefully use a jigsaw. But when using a jigsaw, things never get perfectly straight, so I later on finish up the surfaces with a orbital sander. I only do the precise cuts on one of the pieces, so I can then use that as a template for the other piece. To copy the first piece that now has the exact dimensions I want, I take the other piece, put it on top of the first piece and screw them together. Then I use a palm router to trim off all the excess that hangs over the edge of the first piece. For the corners I use this, I'm really not sure what it's called, like a multi-tool, something like that, but I use that to make the corners really sharp and nice. This hole you see me making here is a maintenance hole. I made it so that I will have access to all the electronics when everything is installed. I intend to have the steps gently illuminated so that during the night it will be safer to walk up and down to the bed. This will be achieved by installing some LED strips underneath the steps themselves. Furthermore, will the LED strips be provided with full power when the built-in drawers are open, so that the content of the drawer will be clearly lit up. I use a very basic router table made out of an old shelf that had a recess to the LED strip. I then also make a tiny track that will hold a power cable to the LED strip. Now this is one of the support pillars for the bed, or really long leg if you want to call it that. You never know if the floor is gonna be in level with the rest of the room, so I did it a little bit taller than I have written in the plans. And to assemble it, I just used some glue and nails and kept doing that until it was done. On all the parts in this project, I sealed the end grain with either wood filler or melamine edge band. It's a lot more work to use wood filler, but on parts like this leg, I have to use wood filler to seal it. The wood filler also fills in the small gap between the glued parts. I prefer to use melamine edge band whenever possible. It's easier to apply, costs less, is harder, and give a far superior finish. To make the corners of this leg a little bit less lethal, I round off the corners with a palm router. To make the leg possible to attach to the floor, I add 2 pocket holes. Applying a melamine edge band to a piece of MDF isn't really that hard to do, especially if the edge band is a iron-on type. I just slap it on there and goes wild with the iron. And try not to burn yourself while doing so. Yeah, that's a good idea. Now I tried many different methods of removing the excess. I tried cutting away with one of those specific tools meant to do that, but that didn't work at all. I just got stuck, it jammed, and I kind of tore off the melamine, and it was a disaster. And then I tried to use a hand planer. The hand planer worked kind of okay, I guess. It took a really long time to do, but it worked, and I got a really good result. But by far, the fastest method was to use a palm router with a downcut spiral flush trim router bit. Wow, that's a lot of words. Anyway, this router bit forces the material down while flush trimming it, and this creates a really clean cut. The fact that it's about 50 times faster than the hand planer is also a really nice bonus. I decided to paint all the parts for the steps and then assemble it. To make the assembly flow as smooth as possible, I decided to use dowels in combination with pocket hole screws. From past experiences, not the best ones, I know that the pocket hole screws can really misalign parts and require clamps to hold things in place while screwing them down. I don't really want to use clamps on newly painted surfaces, so the dowels will help a lot to align the parts as they should be while screwing them into place. At least that is what I'm hoping for. This tool I'm using is a cheap yet very effective double jig. It's far from the best tool for this job, but it gets the job done, and that's all I'm really interested in. It's time to assemble the desktop that is made out of only 2 parts, the large area on the top and then a lip that has a few functions. It makes the desktop more sturdy, it offers a place for LED strip to be mounted to illuminate the underside of the desktop, and it also makes the whole desktop look more solid. I made sure to round over any sharp edges with a palm router. Honestly now, nobody likes sharp edges on a table. We all know that we will hurt ourselves on them sooner or later. This is the guardrail that is being assembled. I had to assemble it before painting. If I had done it after painting, it would have had visible screws, and that's something I really wanted to avoid. The plan was to use only glue, but I was not able to get good contact between the 2 pieces, so I added some brad nails to hold it in place and then clamps to press it tightly together. There were a few parts that needed some pocket holes before painting, so I did that with my pocket hole jig. Adding these pocket holes now makes it a lot easier to install the parts later. Now to the part where I'm a complete newbie, spray painting. I had never spray painted anything of this size before, so I was very nervous about how it would turn out. When I first started to spray paint, I used a way too small nozzle. I think it was about 1.4 millimeters, but I quickly changed it to a 2.5 millimeters. This small size on the nozzle was made for paint that has almost the same viscosity as water, and the paint I was using was a much thicker paint for furniture. When I changed out the nozzle, it went a lot smoother. Something I didn't think would have such a big impact was to have a fan to speed up the drying time. And boy was I wrong. It dried so much faster. After the first coat of primer had fully dried, I lightly sanded everything with the 240 grit sandpaper. Only 1 to 2 passes is enough. This is a necessary step to get a very nice finish. However, I avoided all sharp edges and used abrasive pads on them instead. They're really soft and only remove imperfections. I highly recommend using them for the edges. And finally, I applied 2 layers of paint. It is finally time to transform the room. During this time, I asked my daughter not to peek at what I was doing. I did not think she would be able to stay away. She really wanted her bunk bed, and she did not expect I was doing much more than that. Here you can see me installing the rails that will keep the bed up from the floor. They, together with one big leg, will take all the load from the bed, just like I showed you earlier in the Fusion 360 model. The blue markings on the wall is where the studs are located. On these spots I use extra long and thick screws. I did make the leg longer than the plans told me. This also means that I need to adjust it now when I know how long it's gonna be. With the help of a rotation laser, I can easily mark out where to cut it. I know this looks very weak and unstable, but this sheet has nothing to do with the support of the bed. Its main purpose is to cover up the underside of the bed and also decide where the bed rails and the long leg are going to be located. These walls are one of the worst I have worked on, so I need to reshape the sheet to make it fit. I'm going to use an old trick to get the contour of the wall using a washer and a pen. With this technique I can copy the shape of the wall onto the sheet and cut the sheet to make it fit perfectly against the wall. To cut the sheet I use a jigsaw, but I can also use a circle saw to do this. I also made this sheet oversized because I knew something like this could happen. I know that the rail ends where it's supposed to end, so I will use that information to mark where to cut the sheet. I decided to nail the sheet to the rails so that it wouldn't move around when I work with it. It will be very unstable until all the parts around it are fully installed, but once they are all in place, the sheet will be rock solid. The frame to the bed I glue and nail to the sheet, and to the wall I screw it using pocket hole screws. The type of glue I use is a construction adhesive. Once it's dry, it's very strong. Blue masking tape on the front of the frame is extremely helpful. With it, I marked where to add all the brad nails so I don't nail them too high or too low. It also masked the nail holes so that when I later add some wood filler to cover up the holes, the wood filler will only be applied in the holes and not in the area around them. When the 2 bed frame boards are in place, I screw them together using pocket hole screws. I really like how the pocket hole screws enable me to build things while keeping the screws hidden. I'm not sure what I would have done without them. You can easily see how the wood filler would make a mess without the masking tape. When the wood filler is dry, I simply just pull off the tape and dab on some paint with a tiny brush. No sanding is needed with this method. Until this point, the long leg had not been screwed in place. It was a little bit of a risky move by me, but it worked out just fine. I used the part that I trimmed off earlier to trace it from above. I nailed it in place with some brad nails after I had carefully put the leg in its correct location. The brad nails were only used to hold it in place while I drilled some screw holes and then permanently fixed it in place with some screws. I made sure it was vertical and then I screwed it to the floor, again using pocket hole screws. Now when almost the whole bed is assembled, I decided to put in the sofa. I had to do it now or the steps would be in the way later on. The sofa is in fact a mattress with some custom ordered cushions on top of it, originally designed for outdoor EU pallet sofas. See? Very clean, I told you. Okay, so I'm gonna pretend that I did not completely forget to install this guardrail, and what you see now did not happen as one of the last things in the build. Because, you know, I'm all for safety. Alright, so it's basically a screw from the back of the bed frame and then screwed to the wall using pocket hole screws. Here I install the LED strips that will gently illuminate the steps during the night, and when the corresponding drawer is open, it will blast on with full power and make the content of the drawer light up like a newly discovered treasure from a cartoon. But if I want some drawers, I need to start working on that. So here are some drawer slidings being installed on the inside of the stairs. The most important thing to think about is to have the sliders parallel with each other. As long as they are parallel, the drawers should not jam. I always pre-drill with a self-centering drill so that the screws end up in the correct spot. If this is not done, then there's a big chance the screw might wander off and misalign the drawer slides. With all the drawer slides installed, it's time to assemble the whole unit. At this moment, I was very happy that I had given it some thought about how to address it beforehand. The dowels made the whole assembly very easy, much like how one would assemble a furniture from IKEA. I decided to apply a tiny bit of construction adhesive under the steps to make it more rigid. Now once again, the walls are making this much more difficult than it has to be. But I did the exact same thing as I did with the big sheet for the bed, and then it got a nice tight fit against the wall. This part will fix the unit's width, and it will offer a great place to mount some electronics. This unit is not like a normal cabinet, so installing the drawers cannot be done the normal way. I had to figure out some new way to do it. Normally you start to mount the drawer by simply pulling out the drawer and installing the first screw in the slider, and then you pull it out some more and add the next screw and so on. Instead of doing that, I added a spacer on the step, in this case a piece of acrylic, and then I dropped the drawer on top of that. I then screw in all the screws in the sliders. This way I knew that the drawer would not scratch against the step when pulled out, and it was a really fast method to do it. For those with a keen eye for details, you might have noticed that there was room for 4 drawers but only 3 sets of sliders. The reason for that is that the bottom drawer will not use any sliders and will instead have 4 small wheels mounted under it. It's a very long, big drawer, so a slider will be worse in all possible ways. It will cost more, be less versatile, and would have a much higher chance of breaking because of the large overhang it would have. On the bottom drawer, I need to use some plying cards on each side to center the drawer before I install the drawer front. After that, I use the same procedure on all the drawers to install the drawer fronts. I apply some double adhesive tape on the drawer, and I place the same acrylic I used before as a spacer in front of the drawer, and then I carefully slide the drawer front against the drawer while making sure it is as centered as possible. When it's fastened, I pull out the whole drawer and fix it with some screws from the inside. To make the LED strip change the brightness, I use these micro switches. They toggle between 2 voltages. I placed the switches so they would never press the drawer out when it was closed. It was kind of tricky to find good spots for them, but I found them. The reduced voltage is limited by a dimmer switch that will be hidden behind the lip of the desktop. I drilled from both sides to remove the blowout. Connecting all the switches with the LED strips was, let's just call it interesting and leave it at that. I tried my best to make it look somewhat decent. Some carefully placed cable clips and hot glue in the right places helped a long way. The floor is just as uneven as the stupid walls are, so the bottom drawer doesn't really want to stay fully pushed in. However, there is a really good solution for this: cabinet magnets. These brackets are so I can screw the whole unit to the wall. This was probably the most nerve-wracking moment of the entire build. I honestly didn't know if the bed dimensions were as exact as specified. I had only left room for about 10 mm of error margin. I secured the stairs to both the wall and the long bed leg. It became really stable after I did that. Next up, we have the installation of the desktop. I screw in a total of 3 rails that will hold up the desktop in place. I made sure they were all on the same level with the rotation laser. I think I had to recut the desktop 4 or 5 times until it finally fit. I did not find a good way to copy the exact shape, so I had to remove material little by little until it just fit. I really don't like this adjustable drill. It feels so dangerous. But sometimes it's just priceless to have. I will pull all the cables that are on the desk through this hole, but before I do that, I need to add the desk grommet in the hole to make it look a little bit nicer. I used the construction adhesive to fasten the desktop to the rails. Instead of clamps, I added some heavy water containers on the desktop as weights. I even stood on the desk at one point just to get it into the right position. To spice up the room a little bit, I installed a LED strip on the back of the lip below the desktop. At first, I was a bit skeptical about the color of the cushions, but the color has really grown on me and now I'm a big fan of them. Did you also notice that the wall behind them is of the same color, only much darker? Now this is one of those picture shelves that was on the wall in the old room. It's always fun to think outside the box, and in this case I thought they looked a lot like cable management shelves. So why not reuse them for just that purpose? I just trim them down a little bit and screw them to the wall. It really did a great job of hiding away all the cables. The only thing you will not see me making in this video are these one-of-a-kind shelves. For them I'm making a completely separate video. There's so much unique stuff going on in them that half this video will be about them rather than the rebuild of the room. If you want to see how I make them, then be sure to check out that video after this one. This style of shelf is called a floating shelf. The shelf has 2 parts. The part that looks like a comb is what gets screwed into the wall, and it's also the part that takes all the load off the shelf. The other part is basically just a shell that makes the shelf look pretty. This is acrylic glass that I cut out with a bandsaw and then copied using a flush trim bit. These can be swapped out at any time, so if I want to, I can just order a new laser cut design and swap them out in a matter of seconds. There are so many pre-made designs out there to choose from. Here you can see just a few of them from a simple search. This is the shelf above the bed. It's by far the most complex and advanced shelf I have ever seen.
It has a 5-volt, 12-volt and 240-volt power supplies, 2 Wi-Fi remote control switches, 2 individual dimmable LED spotlights, a built-in 3.0 USB quick charger, an on-off touch button with a built-in dimmer function, Wi-Fi controlled LED bookrest where each LED can be controlled, swappable bookrest, swappable LED strips, and the option to install even more features like a wireless charger.
And yes, it's a shelf. One might think that these mini LED spotlights above the sofa don't offer much. but they really transform the area into something magical. They give life to the wall, and the shadow they cast on the sofa make it stand out more than ever before. Remember this hole? Well, I got to use it now when I added these spotlights that I originally had not planned for. I'm not really sure how I would have installed them if it wasn't for this hole, but thank God it's there. If you have enjoyed the video so far, then please tap that like button. And if you really like it, then consider subscribing to my channel, where I always build new and interesting stuff.